J.L. George lives in Cardiff, Wales, where it's very late at night, and writes weird and speculative fiction. Go through it, JL.
So I'm reading from The Words, which you can see the cover of there, and you can enter a giveaway for later. And in this book, there are 4 young people who have a power called the Word, which they can use to make other people obey them. They've been raised and experimented on in a facility they know as the Centre. And what's happening in this chapter is that Rydian and Jono have managed to run away, and Rydian is looking back on their time at the Centre while they're in hiding. Rachel was slow to admit it when I asked if her parents had been afraid of her. I think they would have sent me here however they felt, she said at last, her words weighed and careful as they always were. They knew it was their duty to the country. We've been given this power for a purpose, after all. She was quiet for a long moment. But yes, sometimes I think they were a little afraid. Jono snorted and kicked at the table leg when I asked him. Yeah, not likely. They'd have to give a crap I existed to be scared. Anyway, here, he looked down. I only ever used it to make them go to bed instead of opening another bottle. Now I'm here, Dad's probably going to drive himself into a ditch somewhere and he'll only have himself to blame. Caddy, new to the Centre and still so timid she almost fell off her chair with fright when I spoke to her, lowered her eyes and shook her head. Not my parents. I don't think they were scared. But Nerys, my little sister, was scared of me. She sniffled and I froze, paralysed on the spot by the sight of a crying girl. Nobody had ever told me what to do with one. Jono came over and put his arm around her shoulders. Don't cry, kiddo, he told her. She didn't object to the kiddo, even though he was only 2 years older than her. She'll get over it, you'll see. She'll figure out you didn't mean to scare her. You know what you should do, though? You should write to her. Right now. Tell her you're sorry and you won't ever use it to hurt her. It'll help if she has that to look at anytime she starts to freak out. The sniffle ceased and Caddy scurried off in search of paper. I turned to look at Jono's profile. He was still watching Caddy, biting his lip in thought, his big brown eyes distant. Are you going to write to your parents? I asked him. There was a moment before his expression turned to scorn. What would I do that for? He asked. They don't write to me. Got all the family I need here anyway. He nudged me with his shoulder and something warm curled in my stomach. Who needs parents, eh? Yeah, I agreed. Who needs them? And thought guiltily of my mother's last letter sitting unanswered in my nightstand drawer. Let's make a pact, Jono said. We're family. We stick up for each other. And whatever happens, we never, ever use the word on each other. I nodded, feeling that he understood something I'd never spoken. Anybody who didn't have the word couldn't really get it, I thought, how it felt like something alien exploding from the core of you when you used it. Reaching down into the part of yourself from which it emanated was like touching an electric fence, except that the shock was inside of you and then in the air and in your words when you spoke, and only when the word was obeyed were you free of it. It made you tremble with relief in another person's fear. It made a monster of you, if only for a moment. Yeah, I said. All right. Family. Jono's face turned thoughtful. We should be blood brothers, he said. Do you know what that is? I shook my head. It's when you cut your palms and then you press them together like this. He clasped my hand in his, making me blink in surprise. So that your blood mixes together. And that makes you family, just like if you were born related. He frowned and looked round. Maybe I can get May to lend us some scissors. Tell her we need to do a craft project or something. At that moment, someone cleared her throat and we found May standing behind us, hands on her hips. We were late for our maths class and Mrs. Jameson would be looking for us. Jono let loose his usual litany of grumbles about why did we need to learn maths anyway, because it wasn't as if we had to do our own shopping or pay our own rent. But we trooped off to class where Jono grinned and mimed jabbing at the palm of his hand with his compass. By that time I'd lost my nerve and I grimaced and shook my head, and Jono teased me the rest of the afternoon for being chicken. 2 days later, maths class was cancelled. Mrs. Jameson didn't show up for 2 weeks. And she came back pale and subdued, her gaze sliding windowwards mid-sentence as Jono and I passed notes at our desks. May told us our teacher's husband had died. Of course, she should have been prepared for that when she let him go into the army. Is it that dangerous being in the army? I wondered aloud. Back home, before the centre, the uniformed patrols had been a simple fact of life, something to be grumbled about when they blocked a main road at rush hour, but ignored the rest of the time. It was difficult to imagine those bored-looking men running for their lives from gunfire. May cocked her head thoughtfully, then patted my arm and told me that, of course I knew no different. The war had started before I was born. Through a crack, I see men in khaki striding up and down the street, pounding on doors. They're all men. They're always all men, though I remember May telling me that when she was a girl, women were allowed to join the armed forces. She mentioned it after Mrs. Jameson's husband died, telling us that her sister had wanted to be a pilot and that she'd been selfishly glad when they changed the rules. The soldiers get no response to their knocking. No surprise there. All the residents fled after the bombing that left the two houses at the end of the street in rubble. The one we're hiding in now bears the signs of their hasty departure. An empty box file on the kitchen table, the all-important papers bundled up before they ran, a forgotten scarf draped over the back of a chair, a child's picture book open at a picture of a smiling cartoon tiger. Not that I've ever seen a real tiger, but from the stripes, I assume that's what it is. A knock on the front door of the house we're in. It hits me like a blow to the head. I stand, frozen, until Jono, finally galvanised into movement, tugs me into the front room. We sit on the carpet for fear of our shadows showing through the curtains, and wait for the soldiers' footsteps to retreat, back to the far end of the street, past the bombed-out houses, to where the machine waits. Thank you, that's it.